But when you have nobody giving you a constant deadline and you're just alone with your crack and your keyboard and your drum machine, you could just sit there forever farting around for like decades and never finish a single thing. And I think that's what his problem was. Welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club, where we discuss books by and about musicians and the music business. I'm Dave, and on this episode, me and my co-hosts Shelley and Jen are discussing Sly Stone's memoir, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. Sly's band, Sly and the Family Stone, is one of the most legendary in music history. The band's sound mixed elements of R&B, pop, dance, folk, and psychedelic rock into some of the most timeless and beloved music of the rock era. Sly's greatest hits is without a doubt part of America's musical DNA. From 1967 to 1974, the original Sly and the Family Stone sold millions of albums and produced timeless classics like Dance to the Music, Everyday People, Hot Fun in the Summertime, I Want to Take You Higher, and Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, which is where the title of the book comes from. They are considered the inventors of funk music and a massive influence on artists from Prince to the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But by the mid-70s, Sly's increased drug use, band lineup changes, and record company problems began to damage Stone's career. In many ways, he never really recovered. The book tells the tale from Sly's earliest days in Texas to becoming a popular Bay Area DJ to becoming the Sly Stone we all know and love. But it also tells the story of Sly's struggles in the ensuing decades. Now here's our content warning, friends. There are some very sensitive adult topics discussed in this video. It's not safe for work, it's not safe for kids, so please make sure you watch or listen to this in the appropriate setting. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone, it's Jen with Shelley and Dave, welcoming you to Rock and Roll Book Club. This month we did my pick and we read a lot about Sly Stone and Sly and the Family Stone and a book called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, which is a play on words for one of his biggest songs that I'm assuming everybody knows. So we're going to dig into Sly and the band and the interesting character that Sly is. And
yeah, to say the least, he's a wild one, that's for sure.
Oh, totally. So we've never gone back so far, to talk about Woodstock in the 60s and the early 70s. And I'm excited that we did this because that is my genre. I was on
the path. Okay, so yeah, just a brief summary of the career of our author, Sly Stone. He was born Sylvester Stewart in 1943. He was something of a child prodigy as a musician. Like he could play pretty much any instrument when he was young. He rose to prominence initially in the Bay Area in San Francisco, first as a DJ, then as a musician. He wrote and produced hits for other people before forming his own band because he figured out he's not getting any money just being the person who produced in the background. He wanted to be in the foreground. And Sylvester, who became known as Sly, and his brother Freddie formed Sly and the Family Stone in 1968 in San Francisco. And they are credited as a band with sort of inventing funk. I mean, they mixed R&B and psychedelic rock and progressive music and just straight up rock and roll. And they kind of pushed it all into this new sort of style that nobody had heard before that we now know as funk. He also had a multiracial band. He had black and white people in the band. He had men and women in the band. His band, Sly and the Family Stone, semi-ended in the mid-70s because of kind of erratic performances and a lot of stuff that we'll get into with Sly's behavior. They didn't formally end until the 80s. And basically, ever since the mid-70s, Sly Stone has worked, but has been a lot more on the sidelines. I mean, his drug problem, which we'll be talking about a lot in this book or in the discussion, really did sideline him for the better part of almost 50 years. I mean, his last known hit was probably 1973, 74. And this book was written in 2023 and he just got off drugs. So that is about 50 years right there. Of just
his drug habit is older than I am.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's a
Yeah.
brief summary of his career. He's very, very influential. He's credited. He's inspired like George Clinton and Funkadelic. He's inspired Prince. He's inspired just all sorts of people over the years. And Michael Jackson, to such an extreme degree that Michael Jackson, when he was still alive, wanted to help Sly and sort of buy his publishing, but let him keep a chunk so he could get a big payday and also get some money on the side, continual money, because he knew he had pissed all his money away. And that ultimately did happen, but it was after Michael Jackson had already died. But that's pretty much the summary of his career. It was over a short period, but it meant a ton. The band is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Their Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits is one of the biggest selling CDs, records, whatever, of all time. Everybody seems to have a copy of Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits.
I do want to say, when I was making my accompanying playlist, every song is good. I mean, he is so incredible, and I put it together. They're all so incredible. I'm not going to give it all to Sly because we know what that band endured, and they're so freaking brilliant. And,
Yeah.
and just what they all did together is absolutely incredible. And I think I've been playing it now for like 5 days. Like, I haven't turned it off. It just keeps cycling through, and everything is so good. And I think I ended with 23, 24 songs, and it's in so many hits that you forget. And his
Dance
style,
to the Music, Everyday People, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, Stand, like all these hits. He had so many big songs.
Yeah. So before I read this book, I didn't know much about Sly Stone individually, but I did listen to Sly and the Family Stone. And so I couldn't really tell you much about, like what kind of guy he was or anything like that. But I did love the music, and it was 100% the music that, like, in college, you're drunk at a house party and somebody puts on Sly and the Family Stone and it is a dance party, so it reminds me of my younger, wilder days, drinking probably old style and dancing to Sly and the Family Stone.
Doing dumb things.
So many dumb, fun things.
I know. Dave?
Well, my impression is pretty similar. Like, I didn't know too much about Sly Stone, the man. I obviously knew Sly and the Family Stone, and it's a similar thing of like, yeah, that's just great party music. Like, I was introduced to Sly and the Family Stone in college, and they're just one of those groups that has seemingly universal appeal. Right? Like, you don't find anybody who's like, when you put on Sly and the Family Stone, of like, God, turn that off, dude. I just, I'm not into it. Whereas, like, almost like the Beatles, like everybody just sort of loves it to a certain extent. And I guess that was my impression, was just that, like, yeah, he was this guy who was around in the early 70s. And part of me in the back of my mind kind of thought he died in the 70s or something, because like he didn't do much in popular music. Like, he didn't have any hits or whatever beyond that initial period. So that's why my impression of him was, oh, I didn't even know he was still around. Like, that's awesome. But like, I had no idea.
I love him. I've always loved this band. I love their music. I love how inclusive his music is. I'm a huge fan. And like, you listen to him and you feel like you're at Woodstock, or you feel like you're just back in time with it. And I've loved them since probably I was a child, thanks to my parents. And that's absolutely okay. Okay, let's talk about his early life and how his family background ultimately shaped his music and his creativity. So as Dave mentioned, he had siblings. He was born into a very, very religious family. His parents, were together. It seemed like the home was, fairly harmonious without some, a few things happening, but he was raised with a lot of music, and I absolutely believe with a lot of love. And I think from day one, this guy was born a hippie smoking weed. So I think he just
out of the womb, toking.
Out of the womb, smoking weed or on a gummy. I mean, that's just how it is with this guy. So I
But
think,
those were the old days when gummies didn't exist yet.
yeah,
And it
you're
was
right.
a sad time for everyone.
Just a
It
big
was
old
a sad
fatty
time.
joint.
It's terrible.
So yeah, I think those early days clearly made him who he was. And I think on top of that, I think Sly is, despite the fact that he was a major druggie and addict and, had some crazy views on relationships, I think at the end of the day, he was kind of a good person in his mind, maybe a little bit.
Oh, 1000% in his mind. Yes.
In his mind, yeah, he
Undoubtedly.
absolutely is a great guy in his mind, no doubt. Yeah, his background was obviously unique. He did come from a strong family, maybe a strict family with the religious aspect or whatever, but they did allow him to play music and pursue his other interests. It wasn't like when you hear a lot of kids who were raised in like a really, really strictly religious household, music was like secular music was like forbidden and you can't be a part of that. And he didn't have that restriction. His folks were like, okay, do what you got to do. And they recognized that he had talent. He had his brother Freddie there, who was also a talented musician. And I think he's always saw things from a different perspective. Like, I don't know whether that was from his parents or because he was raised in different parts of Texas and everything. And then he moved to California. But it's always like, yeah, it just seemed like a natural evolution. He talked about when he started off as a DJ on the radio. And when he was on the radio, he would be playing R&B music, which was what was expected of him because he's a black DJ. But then he'd throw on the Beatles and he'd throw on other stuff. And then they were just like, whoa, you can't put on white artists on a black radio show. And then he's like, why not? And he just did it. And so for him, it was natural just being like, yeah, I'm around white people, black people, Latin people, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. It was society around him that had the restrictions, it seemed.
Absolutely.
And I love it that he made up his own jingles on the radio show. He's just like, I'm going to take this into my own hands. Hey, I'm starting in the middle of the night. Who cares? And it was like the music just could not be contained within him. Like it just had to come out.
And it was good. Almost everything was good.
Yeah.
That thing was Sly. I really, I don't think he was, I don't think the guy saw color.
Whoa. I don't see color.
I think he listened to what he heard. I don't think he did anything to what's the word I'm looking for? To hamper what he played. You know what I mean? Like he just did what he wanted to do, as he's done throughout his entire life. So with that,
he would talk about various people coming to audition for the band. He's like, oh, he's a white dude, but he was great and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, you didn't think about, well, I'm kind of in a black band. I shouldn't have a white drum. It was just like, it wasn't really a thought. He would just do it. Their lyrics were kind of hippie-ish, a little bit about peace and love and understanding and all of that from the vibe of the time. But because their music was so different sounding and they looked so different, they caught on in such a big way. Like, you have a lot of groups that were singing flower power and all that peace and love shit, and their stuff is largely not that memorable today. Whereas Sly and the Family Stone is still timeless. Even if the lyrics are kind of dopey and hippie-ish, it doesn't make any difference. You're just like, this stuff is so fun and the music is so good. And it was just this crazy merging of sounds and styles that nobody really did. And now seems kind of common, like if you think about like, Prince and the Funkadelic and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and all these other bands that mix all this stuff together. Well, yeah, if they didn't have Sly and the Family Stone to have gotten a lot of their ideas from. I think he's a very talented guy, genius level, obviously. I do think the workings of the music business were like, he had this urge or something to always push back no matter what. So if they tell you need to be there at 8:30, he's like, I'm going to be there at 9. Like, it's just I don't accept what you say at face value. I'm always going to push back a little bit. And I think that worked to his detriment because ultimately he got a reputation as being difficult or as somebody that didn't show up or was late or was all of these various things a reputation he was fighting all throughout his entire career. I mean, on the David Letterman interview that I sent to you guys, that was 1983. That was years after Sly and the Family Stone, and Letterman's asking him questions about him showing up late or not showing up. And it was, that was still his reputation 10 years after his peak. So I think he had definite issues with the music industry and the way it was done. Now, I get that, and there's a lot of unfairness in the industry, but he also just had sort of an obstinate view of just like, hey, I don't want to make a new album. Like, fuck you. Stop calling me. Leave me alone. I'm not interested. I'm just going to hang out. And it's like, yeah, but dude, like, this is what you wanted. Like, you got you're a rock star now. You have big albums. The expectations change. You can't just be like, nah, I'm done. I'm out. I don't want to do this for a little while. I'm not going to, I don't want to tour as long as, so it just sort of seems like a lot of times I don't know. I felt he was getting a lot of shit from the industry, and he was throwing a lot of wrenches into the way they normally do things. But sometimes he was just difficult just to be difficult. Like, I didn't feel like a lot of his issues were really, there was a point behind it other than to say like, I'm the fucking man, I don't have to whatever. And it wasn't about any real solid principle that he was trying to advance, in my opinion. I don't know. You guys might.
Although so he threw wrenches, but the promoters threw wrenches back. Mm-hmm. And if you'll recall, he's working with these promoters, and they're double booking him for shows, like 2 shows at the same time on one night. Mm-hmm. And basically just so that they could get more money, but that was setting him up to fail. He can't be in 2 places at once, right? Mm-hmm. And it did make me wonder, how much of that reputation for being late started with that, or how much that contributed to it, and how much maybe he's just like, after a while, like, fuck it, I don't care,
I don't know. Because I wasn't on the scene, none of us were. We were all either not born or children at the time, but it's hard to remember what it was like. I do think, though, that from his perspective, all throughout the book, he still denies that was a problem. Like, he acknowledges, once or twice I was late, or I missed this gig or whatever, but like, it keeps consistently being brought up over and over and over. So I kind of think he's not the most reliable narrator about that particular time in his life, whether he was or wasn't late, whether he was or wasn't being double booked, whether that stuff is true or not. I feel like he's an unreliable narrator to tell that story, like, because the rest of his band was pissed off about him always being late, him missing gigs. It just seems like, well, why would they be pissed about it if it was all bullshit, if it was nothing? Like,
I think we can call this a Sly moment. There's many Sly moments through the book where it's like he says, yeah, I did this shitty thing, but it wasn't a big deal and it was all cool. And it's like, yes, Sly, we know you think it was no big deal and it was all cool, but maybe if we asked other people, they'd feel differently.
Well, he had no accountability. He had no accountability for, and he never took any form of responsibility for his actions.
Stuff just happened. Stuff just happened.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing. He never had any hand in it. Shit just happened.
Yep. Yeah. And he did what he wanted to do. This was told by Sly.
Right.
Yeah.
I was on the top.
Point that I wanted to make was when we saw them getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was in the 90s. It was 20 years after the peak of Sly and the Family Stone. The Family Stone showed up to get the award, and they did not know that Sly was there, and they assumed he wasn't. And they were making kind of underhanded jokes about, well, who's not here and whatever, because they did know that was his reputation for real. It wasn't bullshit. Mm-hmm. And there he was, not showing up again. And they were thinking like, here it is again, 20 years later, no difference. Thank you for the award. I'm happy. My family's here, yada, yada, yada. But where the fuck is Sly? And then, of course, he shows up at the end.
There he is. He showed up.
Oh, it's this guy here.
Well, and in the book, he makes it sound like, yeah, I was waiting behind the scenes and I was going to make this big grand entrance, and it sounded kind of special in the book. And then when you watch that clip,
Yeah.
he
it's
just
nothing.
like strolls out and he's like, thank you. I love you all. And just
Well,
like
you know,
toddles away. And you're like, wait. This is not what I pictured when I read the book at all.
well,
At
you know,
all.
but exactly. This is why we're saying this is told from Sly's perspective only. But you know, the thing that bummed me out so bad, I know we're jumping around some, but with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, with that induction, this guy is just so Sly. Literally, he's so much himself. Like, wouldn't you want to be on the band or on the stage with the band that you formed, with the band that you played, with the band that helped you be where you are? You're going to get more notoriety and more presence standing there with them as opposed to walking out when everyone's done. It's just, he's
Yeah.
That's
If
his
you're
persona,
there,
though.
stand with
Yeah, I
the
know.
band. You know,
But
like
that's
you're
what
already
broke
there.
up- yeah, that's what broke up the band already. You know, like him separating himself from the rest of the group.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're Sly and the Family Stone. We're a band, but then the reality of it, there's Sly, and then there's the Family
The
Stone.
Family Stone. Yeah.
At least in Sly's
Mhm.
mind. And so, even though he did give credit to a lot of people, everyone in the band, you know, about they did this and they did that and they contributed this and it's ultimately him. I'm the attraction here. Like I'm Sly Stone. So who cares who else, you know? So I think there was there were probably a lot of personal issues at that point when they did that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, probably with the exception of Freddie, who's his brother. He probably hadn't been in the same room as some of those people in 15 or 20 years. And there was a lot of like, man, this is exactly what it used to be like. Sly, you blew it 20 years ago, dude. Like we were on top and you blew it, you know? And I think there's a lot of the rest of the band just got tired of it, you know, of just like, you guys all want to celebrate this brilliant artist, but you don't know how much of a drag he really was on, you know, our career.
I was on the top.
I
I
want
do
to
want
talk
to talk more about the unreliable narrator issue.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, because I think that's a really important part of the book is that he really is an unreliable narrator. And as I've said in past episodes, I'm usually the person that's like, well, if they said it, it's true, and I believe you, and I'm on your side, you know. But there were definitely the Sly moments where you're like, okay, this is a very biased view. And also just the way the book kicks off. If you remember, it's like, they're like, okay, they're recording him telling a story. And they're like, what do you want to talk about today? And he's like, nothing. You know, and so, and then I think there was the end had something where we circled back to that moment where they're in a room with Sly. And I think if I had to guess, the way that this book was written is they recorded Sly telling stories. They dug up a bunch of information about things that happened in his life and were like, do you remember any of this?
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, well, what they said, because there's so many moments where he's like, well, what they said happened was this. I don't know. And it's like, okay. So
right.
And then there's a writer that takes all of that and puts it into this beautifully written book that feels very Sly and reads great. And they have, that amazing narrator on Audible. I legit thought that was Sly. I should have looked.
I thought it was too. And
I
I thought they were like,
that it was like, oh wow, this is him.
Very vivid memories of certain things. And then a lot you could be like, you could tell it was like sort of reminding him, oh, remember that time you did this? Because if you notice in the chapters, initially they're like, this chapter, 1966, this chapter, 1967. Then you get to 1975 to 1987. So you have this like 10, 12 years of a chapter, and there's very little goes on. Whereas an entire chapter used to be 1 year. Now he's got a decade and there's not shit because he was just smoking crack and hanging out and working on his music, which like nobody ever heard of. You know what I mean?
He should have named those chapters instead of the years. It's like you should have named them like cocaine, freebasing, crack cocaine. And like, let's just chunk it out by his drug progression because that's kind of what it felt like.
I was on the top.
have strategies, you know, because he talks about how his first record had a review that said it was kind of too convoluted. And then he said, you know, I looked at Bob Dylan, and the way that he was getting his message out was to make the message really, really simple.
Mhm.
And so he switched up the strategy on the second album and blew everyone away and was like, okay, this is like how we can reach an audience is by just being more direct, lyrics wise. And then also him talking about like being in the studio, and I need a different guitar, but that guitar is in LA and we're in New York. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, dude, that's intense. Like, and they did it. They're like, no, we're okay. A week later, here we are. We've got the guitar in LA and we're going to record this. And so even though the music sounds so just joyous and easy to listen to, I really enjoyed learning that there was a lot of thought that is put into it. You know, not that others don't do that. But I like learning about an artistic process, because I think art in general, people just think, oh, it just like comes to you. The painting just is on the canvas. And it's like,
Right.
art is so much strategy that like, it's cool to be able to hear how that worked for him.
No, I think
Yeah.
he's definitely a mad genius, and the idea of just he wants to get it right, and he does know what he's doing. There is a strategy behind it. He's not just fucking around. That mixed with drugs, which kind of changes your your perspective, makes you maybe the reason why he could never get anything going after, say, 1975 was because he couldn't get it out. It would never be good enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like in the 60s, late 60s, there was a definite time limit. You have to be done at this point. So he knows, okay, I got to be done. I'm here. It's Thursday. Here's the final songs. We're moving on. Here's the next thing. But when you have nobody giving you a constant deadline and you're just alone with your crack and your keyboard and your fucking drum machine, you could just sit there forever farting around for like decades and never finish a single thing. And I think that's what his problem was he knew too much and he couldn't just stop. And there was nobody that he trusted around him for decades to be like, it's good enough right there. Like, that's good. But,
Dave, you said he was farting around, and I'd like to invent a new word, which is he was crackling around. Because I think that's a lot of what happened after like 1976.
Yeah.
he put his
agreed.
crack dealers' kids
He
to
was
power.
crackling around my entire life, essentially.
Yeah.
Stone, yeah.
What was the clip with Richard Pryor on the Mike
was the-
show? I don't know what
Mike Douglas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Mike Douglas.
Yeah,
where
he was
it's
like the
him.
Oprah, there was like the Phil Donahue of the early 70s, the Oprah kind of guy.
Well, let me just say kudos to that guy, because he seemed calm during an absolute shit show of an episode with Pryor, who I love, and oh gosh, I just loved him so much as a kid, and Sly, and it's like hard to watch because Sly and Pryor just kind of like fucking around. And let me tell you, of the three of them, one of these kids was doing his own thing, and that was Mike Douglas, and he was sober.
Yeah.
And, like,
Yes.
At least we
he
think.
was the only sober person on that stage. And you're like, what is happening? But
Yeah.
then they trot off to the drum set and the piano, and they're trying to get Richard Pryor to play the drums. And Sly gets on the piano and he starts to sing. What's the title of the song? If you want me to stay, which I love. And all of a sudden, just like you said, it's like, oh, he sounds so good. He's amazing. Please don't stop. Please sing the song. But of course, then they just stop and start fucking around again.
I was on the top.
I want to talk about his relationships, his views of them. You know, again, in typical Sly, from how we've gotten to know him in this book, there's not a boundary. There's no boundaries. So he he always had a series of girlfriends, right? And then he
Mhm.
married, no, wait, Kathy. So he got her pregnant and they were together. And then her sister moved in and he was also with her sister and her.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just really not a,
Yeah, it's just
mean-
like, what? Like, how are you? I don't know. I understand how that relationship is salvaged after that. I don't totally understand it. You're right. He does have very unique views about relationships. Like, it's okay for him to do whatever he wants. It's not okay for his woman friend to do the same thing. Like, he cannot be involved with other people, but he can if he wants to. That was a big part of his attitude, because I remember there was one story where he got really mad because he heard his wife was with somebody else or whatever. But meanwhile, he had like 3 girlfriends. And so, like, how is he upset about that? Yet he is, because he's
Like,
just
he
kinda
was at the house with his girlfriend,
maybe
going
Kathy was like,
upstairs
you
to
know
have
what?
sex.
Sister,
And it's like,
it's
wait,
fine.
what's
I'm
that
over it.
sound? Oh, that's Kathy having sex with a man. And then he just like rips her out of bed and kicks her ass out. And it's like, wait, but
yeah.
who's
And then
this
he
bitch?
said the sister,
But wait, you're literally going upstairs to have sex
Yes,
with this
yes,
other chick. But
yes.
Kathy, how dare? Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
he really, like, he was never with one solid person because he's not capable of it. He did get married at Madison Square Garden in front of thousands and thousands of people, and it was sponsored and their clothes were paid for. And they had everything organized through his manager, which is, fairly brilliant. But
He talked about it on the Mike Douglas show.
yeah,
Yeah, he did.
I
Well,
mean,
barely, but he did.
yeah, there you go.
Mike
That's
brought it up.
Sly. That's Sly. But again, and Arlene, remember Arlene in the end?
Arlene was like his girlfriend and then became his manager.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I think she had some decent intentions for him once they were not involved anymore. And
Well,
there
she
was that
maybe was
part,
able to put him in his place. Like, she didn't. It just seemed like she was able to talk to him in a way that made him kind of like listen. Whereas other women in his life, he just didn't seem to regard them all that highly as any. If you're a musician, that's one thing. You're in the band, you have value to me. This Arlene, you have value to me somehow. The rest of these women, I don't think had much value to him beyond an immediate gratification, and like that's about it. And then he doesn't really think much beyond that.
I thought he did love Kathy,
yeah,
but he
yeah.
maybe didn't treat her the way we would think someone who truly loves you might act. Because, like, didn't they have their first kid? And then, like, a year later, he's like, wasn't it Cynthia? He's like,
Yes.
shit, now Cynthia's pregnant.
Yeah, I'm Googling that right now. Get a baby
Yeah.
with Cynthia in the band.
Yeah, in the band. And what I loved, and I think it's such a good example of how his thinking is so different. Like, she has the baby, and they're like, oh, what should we name her? And he's like, we should make her middle name Fun, because she just got born and life is fun. Okay, fun.
He's like, and then I saw Fun. I hadn't seen her in years. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
he
Yes.
just couldn't commit to anything except
And then
his
Fun and Arlene are like, hey, get your shit together.
Well, and not only that, but then he has all these kids, and there was an issue later on in his life with non-payment of child support.
Yes.
And this was
Yeah.
another thing of like, this just happened to him.
Right.
It's not like anything that he actively didn't do or
Mhm.
didn't pay or didn't prioritize. These are his kids, and he's just like, whatever. Somehow it just didn't get paid. And I ended up going to jail because of it. And I was there, and he went to jail twice for failure of payment of child support.
I was on the top.
I need a new drum machine. I need a new van. I need some more crack. I mean, my money is already spent.
Well, he's got a very
And it was-
inflated
He
sense
really
of
was
self.
he really was kind of a helpless rock star, though, because it was
Oh,
always
yeah.
like somebody helped him find his next place, and then so and so got us an apartment over here, and then this person got us a house over here, and then he never did anything for himself.
Always prevailed. He always came out on top. And if he didn't know the difference.
Right.
So,
Well, that's
I
another
mean,
thing. Part of that unreliable narrator is just like, yeah, he does seem to always kind of come out on top, because a lot of it is he's just indifferent to other people's thoughts and feelings. So for him, everything has worked out great. No, the band, we ended. Everyone wants to do their own thing. No, they'd probably be happier touring around as Sly and the Family Stone and making money and playing but you can't get your ass off the crack. And so you're just stuck in your trailer, chilling out, doing whatever. So yeah, I think that was like, that's why I think that rock and roll book, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame clip, I'm glad you sent that, because that was just so telling to me of seeing the attitude of the band versus Sly. And just, this was 20 years later, and it was like all those same kind of tensions were present there. Like, yeah, time had passed and they'd all moved on and they had different lives, but you could see the second they were all assembled there together, the band was all happy, they're singing along. Sly enters the picture, and it just, the vibe changes immediately.
Well, and it reminds me of, so we see Sly buy a giant mansion, and he's buying Cadillacs left and right for his dad, and he's
every year.
Yeah, new one every year. I mean, good for him. I hope he got good trade-in value for them every year. But he's rich as fuck. He's doing great. He's living large. And then we see, as his addiction ramps up, all that shit starts to be lost. And it's like, oh, well, the tax man took away a couple of my cars and the mansion and whatever. And not my fault.
It just happened.
Somehow
the
I didn't pay
IRS
taxes.
stuff. I don't know why. Why would the IRS bother me?
And then he's like down to like a small house and then an apartment. And now he's living in the mobile recording studio trailer. And it's like, it reminds me of the Lanigan book in that we saw where he got to the point of getting my fix, like just procuring the drugs and taking them was the only goal of every single day.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Mark Lanigan was a much more honest narrator than our friend Sly Stone. And I wouldn't doubt that, that's kind of what was happening, is he's like, I don't really have to give a shit about the rest of this stuff as long as I have money coming in to buy crack.
I think it's difficult partially because he had so much activity at the beginning, and then it's like decades of nothing, of like his delusions about how he's about to come back and he's working hard on this new music and all of this. And it's like, no, you're working hard on smoking crack, really. I mean, you haven't done shit for 50 years. The entire lifespan of Shelley, you've been a crackhead. And, what else is, so I think that's part of the problem with the book is there's so much activity at one point, and then he didn't do that much afterwards. You know what I mean?
I was on the top.
So I want to get into Sly's intuition. And as we know, during that time and the 60s, the 70s, all of that happening, he spent some time with Manson. And he spent some time with Bill Cosby, who, so with Manson, they were kind of hanging out, with a group, and Manson overstayed his welcome and everyone was really creeped out by him. There you go.
He's like, that Charlie, he's crazy and kind of weird.
Well, that's
there's
like
some
just
off
a
about
regular occurrence of like Manson. It starts off like people seem like they think he's okay because he's around he brings a bunch of girls around and drugs, and everyone's like, oh, this guy's all right. And then a week later, he's still there and he never leaves and he's fucking taken over everything. And then you're like, maybe we should get rid of this Charlie guy. Like, like all of a sudden, because there's multiple stories of like the Beach Boys had incidents with like that, Dennis Wilson and some others. He did that to other people. Like he would just get ensconced in their little group. And then a week or so, they're later like, we got to get rid of this Charlie dude. Like it seems fun at first.
The other, to me, one of the more disturbing parts of this book was he was at a party. Were they in Europe? And Bill Cosby was there, and he had his shirt off, and he had two women rubbing him. So that to me, I just,
Sly also implied, like a lot of other people have done, that they knew something was up with Bill Cosby. That he did have a reputation way before anyone else kind of caught on to it in the 2000s, which is when it started coming to light. He was implying people knew this in the 70s that he was like that.
Yep.
And
Yes.
whenever you hear people bring that up, because it's been brought up a couple of other times of people who were like, well, but there was a reputation about Bill. It's like, wow, that didn't get out into the general public.
I was on the top.
He's the own ultimate survivor, because here he is still there. He was reflecting at the end of the book about how everyone's already dead. So and so's dead, and Freddie's dead, and all these people are dead, and yet he's still there.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Billy Preston, who was a liar, right?
Billy
Remember
Preston.
we kept talking about Billy Preston. He lost so many people in a period of time, which we get to in the back of this book. Where
He did.
lost,
It's like him and George Clinton are the only ones left.
yeah,
And
which
they
is
were the two
ironic.
biggest crackheads
Yeah.
of all time. And
Would
yet
not have put my money on either of them, honestly.
or Keith
No.
Richards. So those three, they're still here.
And that is the key takeaway. That is, if you want a long yet destitute life, smoke crack.
Listen, the medical establishment is down on crack, but look at the evidence.
Get it anyway. You
Look at the
can.
evidence
Nothing else
for
matters.
longevity.
I don't know. I agree with Dave that, hot damn, Sly, you did it. You're in your 80s. How the hell did you do it? The ultimate survivor is the music.
Yeah. Yes. That's good. That's good. I
Because
was
that's
going to
just
say,
timeless.
yeah,
It
totally.
is.
Great
Yeah.
freaking music. But
Mhm.
I think the ultimate the survivors are the band. But in addition to that, Cynthia and Rose, who
Yes.
were two women in this band that had to endure what a freaking train wreck Sly was. And just
Mhm.
dealing with everything that was going on with him. And, as Dave said, at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the band sure looked pretty cozy with each other.
They
So
did.
I think the band were the survivors.
And Sly comes off one way when he's telling the story, but when there's other people who also know the story, it's a different sort of a
Yeah.
mix.
They were all in
Yeah,
each
so when
other's
you're
corner.
watching that clip of the induction, it's the early 90s and the whole band is dressed of the time. It's like they're wearing nice clothes, they've dressed up. And I could be recalling this wrong, but when Sly does finally come out, he's in head to toe denim, bell bottoms, fucking platform shoes. He's all, full 1970s Sly.
He's
And
like wavy
even
gravy.
just that shows the disconnect between Sly and the Family Stone. They're
Yeah.
like, we understand where we are and why it's a big deal. And Sly is like, I am here. Everybody love me. Here's my 5 seconds. Aren't you so fucking grateful?
Right, like nothing has changed. He's still in 1972 or whatever. Whereas
Yeah.
the rest of the band was like, they're looking backwards. Like they have families now. They're there in tuxedos. They're thanking their kids and all this kind of
Their
stuff.
grandkids,
And their
everyone.
grandkids. It's like for
Mhm.
them, this is looking back on something they did almost a lifetime ago. And for Sly, in his brain, he's still there. He's
Yes.
still mixing it up. He's still a rock star, and everyone still cares and whatever. And it was like, that's why I said that Letterman thing, which was even 10 years before that, was
Yeah.
kind of sad because he still thought he was where he was. And even in 83, 10 years after the peak of, it was like, yeah, he was on David Letterman and he was going to perform and the performance was great, no doubt. But he just was like lost. Like what year do you think it is, dude? Do you realize where you're at?
Mhm.
Right.
I think it's important to note too what you brought up earlier, Dave, in our history segment, that the reason he didn't let Michael Jackson buy his catalog initially was Michael Jackson's deal was, I will do this if you get sober. And he was like, no, thank you.
Right.
And also people wanted him to write a book forever, but he had to get sober in order to do it. And it's like, so that was what, a couple weeks ago?
Right. He just got sober in 2023 or something, I think.
I was on the top.
I want to begin by saying I learned some really important information in this book, and that is that I've always known cocaine can be ingested in several forms. I learned more about how that actually works. So you've got the powder form of cocaine. Then when you're freebasing,
Kids,
you're
take note.
mixing
Take
it.
note here, kids.
Yeah, kids, right? Don't write this down.
No.
Freebasing is essentially mixing it with a flammable substance so that you can then inhale the vapors. Incredibly dangerous due to the flammable substance such as ammonia, say. Or I feel like he talked about lighter fluid or some shit. Like, not good.
No.
And yeah, this is how Richard Pryor lit his hair on fire and injured the fuck out of himself. I remember that as a kid and being like, Richard Pryor does drugs. Oh no. It was like shattered glass. But I didn't realize that it was from freebasing cocaine. And so that really was a full circle moment for me. And then I learned that the reason crack is called crack is because they mix it with baking soda to form the crack rock. And then when you smoke it, it makes the crackling sound due to burning baking soda. I didn't realize that was a chemical reaction that happened with flame plus baking soda. And so lots of chemistry lessons here.
Mhm.
But I think the two big takeaways, and when we did kind of already address one of these earlier, which is crack is probably a better option than like heroin or even alcohol, because Sly is like in his 80s and that has not taken him down yet. So I feel like maybe there's some like vitamin B12 somewhere in there or something like that. So there's that. And then the other takeaway, though, on the other hand, is that just like any other illicit drug, minus basically weed, yeah, that shit will ruin your fucking life. That shit will drain all your money, make you, well, if you're Sly Stone, make you live in a trailer that used to be a recording studio and essentially forget most of your life. So it's a trade-off.
Yes.
You know, if you want to live till your 80s, smoke crack. But if you want to remember any of it, maybe don't.
I was on the top.
I mean, my final thoughts are: I thought this was an interesting book. I mean, it was I obviously know Sly and the Family Stone. Their music is legendary. Like their greatest hits is like pretty much part of the American musical DNA that's out there. It's just fantastic stuff. It is sad in a way that he's just wasted his entire life, like 50 years, the last 50 years of just doing nothing, of just resting. I mean, he still performed and, you know, we didn't talk about, he would go to Europe and do some shows or go to Japan or whatever. It's not like he sat around the house smoking crack constantly, but he never got anywhere near his former level. And a lot of it was just because nobody ever said no to him in the olden days, and then he just got accustomed to that, and it was like you couldn't tell him anything for the rest of his life. So I guess my final impression is I just felt sad that it was like I learned a little bit about his lifestyle and I learned about his past and everything, and all that was very interesting, and the creative process of making those classic records. But then once you hit like 1974 or 75, to me it's just really sad the rest of his life of just nothing.
I don't know. It is pretty sad. I do have to say, though, despite all the shortcomings we've discussed, I did really like him and, you know, his unique take on the world and his unique way of thinking. And I feel like if he really does talk anything like the narrator does, like I could listen to that guy, like he could talk me to sleep every night and that would be great. But you just got this sense that if you were willing to ride along on the delusion that Sly Stone could make you feel like everything was going to be okay. All you have to do is just ignore everything else happening around you. So I don't know. I still liked him. I'm glad I read the book. But now it's like listening to the music. Am I going to just be thinking about how much other music we are probably missing out on because of his drug use? And yeah, it's pretty depressing.
listen, I think our expectations on a lot of these people that we read about, I mean, when we have really, really high hopes of someone amazing doing amazing things and keep on going, that's great. But I think a bulk of these people who are so brilliant and such magical geniuses, like, something's going to get in their way. And it's usually drugs, as we have seen here. But,
Yeah,
or debauchery.
nobody's perfect,
Yeah,
50
exactly.
years of crack cocaine,
Yeah,
whatever.
they got
But I mean,
access to it. They
yeah,
feel
yeah.
good, whatever. Sly's an old hippie. He was born with the joint. Anything
No,
sounds good.
part of me
Anything is
feels
good.
like, the music is so timeless and it's so good and everybody seems to love it that it's almost like when you learn more and more and more about his life, it didn't take away anything. I still love the music, but maybe you don't need to go that many layers into Sly's life and other things because all it does is maybe detract from the music. Like if you want a totally positive experience of like, hey, this guy is just transcendent and he says that, then just listen to the albums,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to get into the details of his life, you're going to end up being like us, like kind of disappointed. Like, why didn't he do much after 1975? Or like, it's disappointment of like, wow, he could have done so much more and he didn't. And it's not just crack. I think it's also his ego and other things that go along with it. There's becoming a celebrity, making a lot of money. That changes you. The way people treat you when you become famous.
I also thought it was interesting that before we read this, I thought that we would learn more about challenges he faced in his career. I mean, obviously, racism has to play a role in something. Like, am I wrong there? Like, just
Well,
because it's the 70s and the 80s I mean, we're still clearly surrounded by
maybe,
a
but
whole bunch of racists. And I
we are.
thought we would hear more about that. And that I don't know if he made that as a conscious decision, like he just didn't want that to be part of his story, and that's absolutely his prerogative. Or was he a little bit immune to it because of who he was and how successful he was?
I mean, you can't be a person of color in America and not have any
Exactly.
experiences of racism or whatever. And
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm saying.
he
Yeah.
definitely did, but like at the same time, fame insulates you from a lot. And maybe people just viewed Sly as like this something else because he's a rock star and he just had a different experience. People didn't treat him the same way that he would have been treated if he had just been Sylvester, whatever, the guy, who worked at the mall or whatever. I mean, it's a different vibe. And I think that there is something about when you get to that superstar celebrity level, even racists have a different view of you.
I mean, and he did. I think you're probably right on that, Dave. He did acknowledge the presence of that in society, and I think that's one of the things he really wanted to do with his music was demonstrate how everyone can work together and be together and share joy. And he wanted to reinvent the U.S. flag to be black and white. But so like we know that he was trying to do something in his own way to show people a better path. But interesting that we just don't get the other side of that. We're not like mad about it. It's just surprising to me.
He had a band that was mixed race. He had a band that was mixed gender. And that was his presentation of like, there's no issues here. Now we all know there were, on the side, but he had this presentation of, I got black people, I got white people, I got women, I have men, I have this and that. We're all together. We're singing about love. We're doing all these things. That's the way he wanted to present himself. I mean, music was amazing. He had a great upbringing. His life story up to the point of becoming famous and then making those early records is all fascinating. It's just a lot of nothingness after that.
Although I did really appreciate his caper with George Clinton, where they went to buy some rock and realized they were short, didn't have any money. And so he had a tape with him and told the drug dealer, who was a massive Sly Stone fan, this is a demo and don't listen to it, but I'm going to let you hold on to it while we go get you some cash. And George Clinton's like, "You got a demo on there?" And he's like, "No, there's nothing on that tape."
Bitter hand at the bottom of the ocean.
I am excited to announce that our next book is The Witch's Daughter by Arenda Fink. Bands you might know her from are Little Red Rocket, Azure Ray. That band was on Saddle Creek Records, which is based here in Omaha, Nebraska. So we have an Omaha connection. She did live here for a bit. And I think this is going to be a really interesting book because it's not only about her career as a musician. It's also about growing up with a mom who battled mental illness and who claimed she was a witch. And so there's a lot of, it sounds like, crazy shit that happens to Arenda Fink as she's growing up. And it should be good. I know, Dave, you interviewed her on The Dark Stuff. I don't know what year that was.
10 years ago. But
Right.
okay, so
But yeah, so The Witch's Daughter by Arenda Fink will be our next book. And so get started on that if you want to read along. Otherwise, join us next time and we will spoil it all for you, as we do.
So, thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and we will continue bringing amazing book content to you. And until next time, goodbye.
adios, friends.
Subscribe to YouTube. Follow us on socials.
Tell your
please like and
friends.
Tell
Share
your
this, share
friends.
this video
Tell,
with your friends on Facebook and whatever.
tell the person at the grocery store. Do people go into grocery stores anymore? I don't.
I do. I do.
No.